You're listening to an IOE podcast.
Powered by UCL Minds.
Welcome to the Staffroom. I'm Elaine Long.
And I am Mark Quinn.
We are programme leaders on the UCL Early Career Teacher programme. Why are we in the Staffroom? We're here because this is where the best professional learning conversations always take place. This is where problems faced by teachers and leaders today can be explored critically and where meaningful connections between research and practice can be made.
Over the course of the series, we'll hear the voices of different colleagues as they come into the staff room, from ECTs to academics and executive leaders. We'll talk about all things education, the challenges and the joys. So why don't you enjoy a coffee with us, perhaps even grab a biscuit and sit down for an hour of staff room chat. Welcome to the staff room, Evelyn Forde. Evelyn Forde, MBE. I'm sure you like being introduced that way, Evelyn. We're morning time in the staff room, but I'm sure you've had a busy morning already, Evelyn. So we're going to allow you to take a seat in our staff room. There's the special chair. Have a seat. Put your feet up. Rest. My job at the beginning of this podcast is always to bring you whatever drink you'd like to drink and whatever biscuit you might want to eat. So what's your order, Evelyn?
So please could I have an oat milk chai latte? Okay, because obviously I'm being very bougie here, so it's got to be oat milk and less of the caffeine. So an oat milk chai latte. And I'm going to mix it up and say I'd rather not have a biscuit, but if you could give me an almond croissant, I'd be really happy with that.
Okay, so I'm going to have to pop around the shops to get you an oat milk chai latte and an almond croissant from the local Costa. I'll be back in a few minutes. Can you take over, Elaine?
I can. Can you get me a hot chocolate while you're there, please? And also a pan au chocolat as well, because I'm going to join Evelyn in her bougie taste. She has inspired me. Evelyn, you're already upping the quality of the staff room today. So thank you for that. Off you pop, Mark. You go and get those.
Yeah, you're taking advantage now, you realise.
But we feel very lucky to have you here today because we know you're in demand at the moment, and we're very excited to hear about your journey and about your thoughts about education at the moment. Our listeners will be keen for you to introduce yourself. So please could you tell our listeners about yourself and your career to date?
I can. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward. I'm going to await the chai latte and croissant. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to spending the next hour with you. So I am Evelyn Forde. I am a former head teacher. But if I just take you back just a little bit, well, maybe more than a little bit. So my journey into education probably started well, let's start with my own experiences of education, which many, many years ago was not that great an experience. I was disillusioned with school. I didn't feel like I actually didn't feel like I belong. When I reflect about it now, I just kind of couldn't find my place in a school that was really, really challenging. So left school with no qualifications. And then it was only when I had my two daughters, who are now young adults, that I decided I needed to go back into education. I needed to do better for myself and for my girls. And so I went back and I did a night course in childcare just to kind of dip my toes in. What's this education malarkey, right? I was inspired by the lecturer on the course who she made me find my place in education. She made me believe that I could be somebody. And because of her, I then did an access course, got my GCSEs, and it was an access course into higher education. then went and did a degree at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, and I then did my PGC at the Institute. So I did my PGC in history, and I then became a history teacher. And you could say the rest is history, but that was kind of where I started my teaching career. I then, realised I wanted to be a teacher. I got my first job in White Hart Lane, tough gig in North London, but absolutely loved it. And it was after that, I think I was there for about 2.5, 3 years, that I then moved to Hornsey School for Girls as a head of year. And when I reflect on what were the best gigs in terms of being in schools, being a head of year was just amazing, just working with, I don't know, a great team, a great tutor team of 9 tutors, and then the girls were just phenomenal. And that gave me a taste for leadership, because I realised that working with this amazing team, the impact that you can have on adults and young people. And so I then joined a program called Future Leaders, which is a fast track program, puts you into inner city, challenging schools. And the idea is within 4 or 5 years, you'll be ahead. I think that was a stretch too far for people who kind of hadn't had that experience. And I might touch on this a bit more during the conversation, but it took me quite a while to get that first deputy head job. But when I did, again, another great gig in another really tough school in northwest London. How I describe the school is that it was known as the most unionised school in London. The head and the senior team had been removed for financial impropriety. The building was falling down. Standards were low. Everything about it was just like a really tough gig. But those are the kinds of schools that I feel like I thrive in. And that's where I got my first deputy head job. And then, thereafter kind of moved into headship, again, not without its challenges. And then I got my first substantive headship outside of London, actually. And I then came back into London. That was quite a strategic move, if I'm honest. I then came back, and the best gig was leading Coptal School, another girls' school. I'm very, clearly I've got 3 daughters. It's kind of that girl power, really want young women to have those opportunities and see strong role models. So I was ahead between 2015 and 2023, and I stepped back from headship in the summer of 2023. And just doing lots of other stuff, which I'm sure we'll touch on during the conversation.
I think after all that, you definitely deserve that coffee and that croissant, because you're definitely not afraid of a challenge, and you've definitely achieved a lot. So you deserve a sit down and to put your feet up. I'm interested in what you said at the start about not really feeling a sense of belonging in school. And then you talked about the lecturer that had a really significant shift in your life. And I wondered if you could talk a bit more about that, the importance of belonging and the impact that had on you. I reflect on it now as an adult, because when you're a kid, right, you're in secondary school, you probably don't have the headspace to reflect on, well, why is this happening, right? Why is nobody checking in on me? And so I was in a school that was a really tough school. It was kind of, those schools that we used to call sink schools, where you just kind of send, if there's always had spaces. So obviously, So anyway, I went to this school in northwest London, and it was at a time where, education has really moved on. And so I say we've got belt and braces around safeguarding. Okay, that wasn't in place when I was in school, and so because
I suppose part of it was because I joined when I was, it was halfway through year 7, because we'd emigrated to Ghana and we came back as a family, and we lived in Willesden, and that was the available school. And so maybe people had formed their friendships. And, you know, when you kind of come in halfway through a year, you kind of feel slightly on the margins. But I think it's incumbent upon schools to make sure that nobody does feel on the margins, right? So if you are an in-year admission, staff should make you feel like you belong, and that wasn't the case. But the whole culture of the school wasn't set up for children. You know, now that I look back at it, it wasn't set up for children. It was really about the adults would show up, we would sit down, they would try and teach a lesson or say, look, here's a worksheet or whatever. So it wasn't engaging, it wasn't inspiring. And so when it was easy to jump the fence, because like I say, you didn't have safeguarding like we know it today, it was really easy to jump the fence. And so I jumped the fence. You know, I used to ride the number 8 bus up and down Oxford Street, and I didn't belong. And I know that now, and I didn't matter. And I think there's something about belonging and mattering. And so, yes, I belonged to a school, right? Because my name's on the register, and so I'm part of the school. But did I matter enough for the teachers to notice when I wasn't there? And that wasn't the case. Did I matter enough for them to... obviously we didn't have first day calling and stuff, but you could still have called my parents, right? And, you know, said your daughter's not in school or whatever. So that whole sense of belonging and mattering, I realised that just wasn't there in the school. And so when I went to night school and I met this lecturer, she was teaching on the course. It's the first black woman I'd seen or knew as a teacher, right? As a lecturer. And she invested, you know, she took the time, she asked me and the other students questions about ourselves. And if it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't have known that I could have done an access course to get my GCSEs. And so I felt that I mattered to her. She cared enough about me and others to say, you can do better. So that was missing at school, but I found it through her.
Yeah, I love that word, mattering. And I think you set a really powerful challenge for people listening in educational context to ask themselves, to what extent are their actions, behaviours, attitudes ensuring that children in their setting feel like they matter? I think that's such a powerful challenge. And I know it links to so much of your work and passion in education.
Yeah, definitely. And I talk about it a lot, and I look at it through 2 lenses now. So I look at it through, you're 100% right, our children have to matter, but the adults in the building also have to matter. And I think with the recruitment and retention crisis, post-COVID, you know, mental health crisis, challenges for adults as well as the children, I just think we as educators and, you know, leaders in schools, we need to make sure that everybody feels like they belong, that they matter, so that if a member of staff hasn't shown up or returns from an absence, are we just kind of, you know, stressed because they weren't there? And so we don't even take the time to say, how are you, welcome back? And I think if we can do that, then we do instill that sense of belonging and that sense of, actually, you do matter to our school and our colleges, etc.
And it's so foundational, isn't it? Because I think in education we can get so caught up with the latest piece of research or efficiency or the performance measures, and we forget that mattering is foundational to everything else. Like, if that's not there, it doesn't matter what educational evidence you're looking at, it won't work. I've just noticed that Mark's popped back with his bag from the shop, so let's see what he's got.
Maxed out the credit card on the old milk chai latte. I don't think I've ever used those words before out loud, but I have now. So I did hear what you were saying though while I was away. I just that really interesting, isn't it, Evelyn, about how you found your way back into education when education hadn't been a happy place for you.
Mm.
And you're probably aware it's Mesereau's work, isn't it, from the early 70s? He writes about particularly actually studying women re-entering education as adult learners, and about how that is how, it's the identity formation at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clearly a seminal moment for you, right? That finding that tutor who noticed you, who made you feel that you mattered. And I'm going to invite you now to do a bit of self-plugging, because your book, Her Story, is it's out there and people are reading it. I'm sure you're really excited about the fact that people are reading it.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just tell us what prompted you to write it.
Yeah. So I think when I reflect on it, because people do say, oh, how long did it take? And have you always wanted to write a book? And I think we all have a book in us, because I think we all have lived experiences, and, our stories are interesting and powerful and can, really make a difference. And so I think my book came from my own lived experiences in education. So yes, whilst I entered the profession as an adult, I entered it with a passion to want to really make a difference for young people because of my own experience, which I've just shared. But I don't think, and I say this in the book, I don't think I realised how tough it would be once I decided that I wanted to become a senior leader. So that entry into middle leadership was fairly easy, in so much as a job came up, I applied. I didn't feel that there were any barriers. It was an opportunity. I embraced it. I went for it, and it was great. And so maybe I was a bit naive about that next step into senior leadership, because, I wasn't aware of the data. I kind of hadn't really scanned the landscape to see, was there anybody that looked like me, or were there lots of people that looked like me? But it was a Black woman who was on the Future Leaders program. She was doing her placement year at the school I was at, and she said, hey, I could nominate you to, be on the program. And I was like, wow, yeah, great. Tap on the shoulder. I'm going to embrace that. So it was thereafter, really, that the challenges kind of came about, because when other people in my cohort on the Future Leaders program, they were getting jobs as a deputy head. We all had the same training, like superb professional development. We had coaches. We went on a study tour, an international study tour. So, you could say we were probably all, it was an even playing field, naively, because it wasn't, right? It wasn't. And so applying for these jobs and not getting them, obviously you go from one job, you go for two, you're like, okay, I can work with this. Nobody expects to get the first job, but 18 interviews later and some very woeful feedback, not just woeful, but when I think about it, when somebody says we're not sure how you would relate to our community, you just think, well, actually there's an agenda here.
And these were in London. These applications were made.
These applications were in London. Yeah, I was always going to stay in London, and so it was tough. It was really, really tough to get a job. And then when I did get a job, and in the school that was like a really tough gig in Northwest London, I experienced quite horrific racism, and I was then becoming more aware. In terms of looking around, I can't see many Black head teachers. I can't. The middle leadership pipeline seems to be, stagnating. It's not looking good. And so it was my lived experience that prompted me to want to write the book. But I also wanted readers to know that mine wasn't and isn't an isolated story. And
Right.
so therefore the testimonials in the book kind of add some add to what we are being faced with. The book comes from my own lived experiences in the sector, but also, as people know me, I'm ever the optimist. I'm, very hopeful. So the book does start with my story and then testimonials, and then as you journey through the book, it ends with we can do better, call for action, some recommendations. Let's just change the system for better for children and adults in it.
Right. So I was interesting because people write autobiographies and they call it my story. And you talked about how your book does open as my story.
Yeah.
But that's why this book is interesting, because it's not, I'd say, just about Evelyn Forde. It is about, it's about others. Yeah. And it's about, there's a general call to action, which is why I guess her story is just a much more appropriate title, isn't it? Than my story.
There's a slight bit to it that I think you'll find interesting. So, hundreds of years ago, when we all started getting our email addresses, my email address is herstory1. So I was the first person, because if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, anyway, herstory1 is my email address, right?
I thought you changed your email address to match the book, and I'm thinking, how clever.
No. I was the first person with herstory1. And so the thing about being a history teacher, his story, I was flipping the narrative in so many ways, I don't want to hear his story, I want to hear her story. Let's talk about what history actually looks like. So there's a couple of kind of plays around with the word.
So her story really is your story, right? So
it really is. I own it, right?
I wonder, what did you learn about yourself by writing the book?
Yeah, you know what? I think I knew this about myself because 18 interviews and kind of the stuff that I did go through, I reaffirmed resilience, because I think you do need a lot of resilience when you're kind of up against these challenges. So I learned that, yes, I am quite resilient. And I suppose I also learned that... I also learned the power of investing in relationships and friendships, because I think I realized how much I needed people around me. But as you're writing, you're just kind of remembering different people and different incidences. And at the end of writing the book, and I have said this to a few friends and colleagues, but I have said it to them now as well, that I wasn't sure whether I ever really thanked my senior team enough. And I learned that so as I was reflecting on it, I just thought, I feel like I was a really good head teacher, but we couldn't have been as great if I hadn't had my team around me. And so I reflected on that a lot, and I thought, I just need to keep saying to them, you're amazing, and thank you for being part of my journey in education. So that was a nice reflection moment for me as well.
It's interesting, Evelyn, that you mentioned you're ever the optimist, and your book ends with the idea that we can and must do better. Yeah. And having read your book and really enjoyed your book, that was my feelings as well. And there's a challenge for us all there, isn't there? Like, that involves us all. We all can and must do better, and that's on all of us. To do better. And I think a part of that is reading and understanding about people's lived experiences that are different to your own. And in your book, you said something really interesting that really caught my eye. You said Black women do not get to have a day off. And I found that a really powerful sentence. And I just wondered if you could unpack that for our listeners a bit.
Yeah. So here's another really interesting thing. So when I started writing the book, and my publisher is Andy Buck from Leadership Matters, and just a lovely guy. And
before you go any further, Andy was my first head teacher.
Was he?
Yes,
Yeah.
in my first job in teaching, Andy was my head teacher. So we
Look.
might cut this, but and Andy's an old associate of mine as well, so that's great.
Yeah, a lovely guy, right? And so when you write, I didn't know this, but when you're writing a book, you know, you might start with a title, and then you might start with the front of the cover looking very different to how it ends up. And so the title of the book was going to be If Boris Johnson Was a Black Woman.
Oh, wow.
And the reason for that is because in the book there is a section around what Boris Johnson as a white man has got away with, essentially. You know, some of his comments are just horrific, right? But he's got away with it, and he can make mistakes. You know, he has a network of people that will just kind of pick him up. You know, I think he either went to Oxford, Cambridge, Eton, wherever he went, but you've kind of got this crowd of people that open doors for you. And so that's what the book was going to be called, If Boris Johnson Was a Black Woman, because it relates to the point of the burden we carry as Black women, right? He doesn't have to carry any of that. He's got this, you know, he's surrounded by opportunities and so on. And so when I talk about Black women do not get to have a day off, it's because if I'm talking about in the sector, there's not enough of us, right? There's not enough head teachers, CEOs, you know, in those really kind of in those kind of top jobs. And so people are always looking at what you're doing, on the one hand in a positive way, okay? And I was at a round table yesterday, and this woman said to me, she said, I said, oh, hi, I don't know you, but hi, I'm Evelyn, da, 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 da. And she said, oh, yes, I know you. And, you know, I kind of stalk you or follow you on LinkedIn. So I know what you're up to. And I said, yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that could be a good thing that you're kind of cheering me on from the sidelines behind a screen. But then you could have a whole swathe of people who are just kind of watching your every move. You know, how did you get that MBE? How did you become head teacher of the year? You know, and if you make one mistake, what we don't have is what Boris Johnson has, right? If I make a mistake, I could be out of a job, right? He would never be out of a job. And so it's a burden that we carry. On the one hand, like I say, it's super positive. We want to be role models. We want young people and aspiring leaders to see us in these positions. But on the other side, it could be, you know, your naysayers who are just kind of looking to see, are you really who you say you are? And that's a burden to carry. And the other burden we carry when we're talking about race equity is that, you know, I could be in a room, other people could be in a room, you might be the only Black woman in the room, and there's a conversation about race or race equity, and everybody looks to you because there's an assumption that we are the, you know, the oracle of everything. And that's quite a heavy burden to carry. And I just say to people, actually, it's incumbent upon you to get educated. And like you said, Elaine, it's on all of us. It's on all of us to kind of educate ourselves and skill up and so on. And that burden can be quite exhausting. And like last week or 2 weeks ago, there was an event at Westminster and it was talking about racism in schools. And it was a panel of young people. And I just come back from a conference where I delivered 2 workshops on race equity. And I had bought a ticket to go to this Westminster gig. And I came back after the conference and I just thought, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted talking about race equity. I'm exhausted having conversations about it. It's a burden that I carry. And I just messaged my friend and I said, I just can't come to the Westminster thing. I just can't. I haven't got any more to give today. And so I'm just going to take a moment. And that kind of burden that we carry, it can take its toll. And so I think it's important, for listeners to think, whichever space you're in, if you feel like you're carrying the weight of, it's okay just to check out sometimes. It's okay just to say, I need a minute, and take the minute and then come back.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you speak about that, Evelyn. And I think it really does reinforce that we all need to do better in understanding the impact of, micro and macro aggressions on people, and the emotional labour involved in that. Because when we think about equality in schools, we don't think necessarily enough about equity and actually the lived experience of other people. And it's a great challenge for people, and I think reading books such as is the one you've written really helps with that. But I know also you talk passionately about equity and your lived experience, and you talk about that bravely, and we're all the better that you do. But you're also an expert on leadership. You're also an incredibly successful leader, so we'd like to hear about that as well, I think, because that's another hugely interesting part of your career.
I was struck by what you were saying about, did you remember to thank the teams around you? And you do write about the importance of leaders nurturing leadership in others without bias, you say. And is that, I want you to explore that a little bit for us. I wonder if some of that actually relates to what you were just saying about the burden on you as a Black female leader, always having to be on it, never having a day off. Is nurturing leadership in others part of actually forming the family, forming the allies around you? Is that also part of it? Leaders need other leaders around them. So what does it look like to nurture leadership in others?
I've always said this, that, and I'll repeat it because I've said it here, that I was a successful head teacher, but it was because of the team around me. And, when I went into Coptal, I inherited a team. And, the school had gone into requires improvement, people were feeling quite vulnerable. And I just realised that they needed a strong leader. We needed to get out of requires improvement. But the way to do that for me is finding the best qualities in each individual. I always used to say to my team, we all make mistakes, because we do, right? But it's about not making the same mistake twice, and just kind of learning from, where's the learning in this? And so for me, knowing my own kind of limitations, I suppose, and a good example would be is that I come up through the pastoral route, so was never a head of department, etc. Yes, I've led on data as a deputy and so on and so forth, but I've never written a timetable, right? I don't really want to write a timetable. Do I know what a kind of financially balanced curriculum looks like? Of course I do. But my deputy, his ability to write a timetable, like with this super sharp lens on what's going to be best for the school, I would just kind of hand that over to him. So I think it's about instilling that kind of autonomy and confidence in others so that they can, be the best that they can be. And so that's kind of my leadership style. It really is and was finding the best. And I said, let's look for the nuggets in everybody. So you kind of find those gems that people have, and then you nurture them. Obviously, there's that kind of challenge and support as well. But within all of that, is about fostering those relationships, because I am very much a relational type person. So really fostering those relationships as well. And I think that really served us well. I really, really do. And being in a team and knowing what you are particularly good at and what others are even better at, I think is really important. I think being open to challenge. I had a senior assistant head on my team, and she would nearly every SLT meeting, which was great. The first one, I was a bit like, oh my God, this woman is a force for good, a force for good. And she would sit there quietly and she'd kind of nod sagely and she would say, I just need you to explain why you've come to that decision. And I'm first of all, I'm like, well, I'm the head teacher, but kind of once you kind of get over that, and again, that attention to detail, like she led on SEND and she knew the SEND code of conduct inside out. So if I was going to say something or make a decision, have a conversation, she would always sit there sagely and say, well, according to code, point, and for me, that was brilliant. It was brilliant that I'd created a culture where my team could speak up, without fear of retribution, without fear of anything. And it would be, thank you so much. I hadn't thought about that. And, so for me, that is kind of fostering and instilling, that confidence and autonomy. And I think if you do it at senior team level, that will permeate through your school, because other leaders and teachers will see, how the senior team are kind of operating. And so for me, that is about growing successful leaders. It's about them being the best they can be.
You make that sound really easy, Evelyn, but it obviously isn't. Why isn't it easy to do that? Why don't more head teachers behave that way?
Yeah. Do I'm going to say, I think it is easy. And I think where I landed, and that question you had about reflection on my book, actually, I think where I landed quite early on in my headship was just be you, just be yourself. And, yourself with those qualities that are about inspiring, nurturing, and developing. And if you can hang on to those and not be the big I am, and I think that's where some of the leaders, in my view, that's where it can go wrong, because you can see some leaders who, if they had been challenged in a meeting with, I'm not sure about that whole thing, well, I'm the head teacher and I've made the decision and that's what it's going to be. That's not going to be in the interest of the team or the children and so on. And so I think it's about being emotionally intelligent as well. I think that's really important. Knowing when to say sorry, knowing when you've made a mistake and just like hands up, I made a mistake on that one. I'm really sorry. I need to do better. So I think where I landed was I can't be any other head teacher. I look at and admire and respect loads of head teachers and leaders, but I will never be them. Nobody will ever be me. But it's some of those qualities that we can, hang on to and just be a nice person, right? Just be a kind person. And I think if you can do all of that, then it makes the job a bit easier.
Yeah. It's funny because sorry, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, I think we found our profound title for the podcast, Just Be a Nice Person.
I was going to say, it's funny because when I started my first middle leadership post, I remember my head teacher saying to me, Elaine, I just look for nice people. I employ nice people. And at the time, as I suppose quite a precocious sort of 28-year-old, thinking I was going to, transform education. I think it's more about being nice. What's he talking about? And now at the age I am now, I think, it is fundamentally just being about a nice person. But that can sound simplistic, but there's so much emotional intelligence that underpins underpins that sort of providing other people with psychological safety, that sort of authenticity to admit your mistakes and say I don't know it all, but at the same time providing enough competence for people to trust your judgments as well. I mean, that it's hugely difficult and hugely undervalued in leadership. I think we probably don't talk enough about how we actually do that, because it's so hard. But when I think of, you know, all the leaders I've worked for that have done that, they've been inspiring leaders to work for because they've done that and because they've created the team. And there's a lot that's written about collective efficacy in leadership now, and it sounds like to me the team you're describing had really high levels of collective efficacy. You know, this isn't just about one person, but together there's a real belief that you know, we are the people that make a difference to that school. And I think it's a fascinating thing to talk about. One of the obstacles to getting leaders like that in schools is our current retention crisis. And another thing that really took my interest in your book is that you frequently highlight the disparity between the number of applicants to initial teacher training from people of colour and the low acceptance and completion rate. So a high number are applying, but we have this low acceptance and completion rate, which seems mad given our retention crisis and given the fact that we want role models and people from colour to be in schools. What do you think accounts for this? And a harder question, how do we tackle it?
Yeah, so there's lots of research. You know, I point listeners to the NFER. They do amazing research in this space. And, you know, even they are at the point of, why is this? You know, what is happening? I think there's probably something around unconscious bias at application stages, which we know across many sectors. You know, if people can't pronounce somebody's name, or, you know, they've got their own kind of unconscious biases that they're bringing to a selection criteria, then some people may not make the cut. There's something, for me, I think there's something about when we put trainees, because there's something about the retention rate. Okay, so we apply, some of us might get to our placement schools, but then we don't continue. And I think there is something about, you spoke about psychological safety, and there's something about being in schools as a trainee where you know it's going to be safe. And I'm just not sure that there's enough work being done between, okay, you're on the ITT course and I'm going to place you in a school in East London, let's say. Have we as ITT providers, have we looked at their policies? Are they an anti-racist school? Are we looking at who else, what's the diversity level in that school? Because if I'm the only Black person going into a school and it's not an anti-racist school, they haven't had racial literacy training, they haven't had unconscious bias training, and I'm being placed in there, it might not be a great experience for me. And so therefore my experience of being on the training course will mean, actually, you know what, I'm going to give up. I don't want to complete the course. So you also see the completion rate isn't what it should be. So I think there's something around what needs to be done at ITT level. And then, so the pipeline is blocked from ITT right through to middle leadership, right through to senior leadership, as we know. And I just think that, you know, there's currently a review on the MPQs at the moment, you know, and I think there's some work that we can done on our professional learning so that everybody is aware of, you know, the challenges that people of colour might face, you know, in an MPQ. Are we doing anything around racial literacy? Are we doing anything on unconscious bias? Are we actually talking about being anti-racist schools? And, you know, I facilitate on a couple of MPQs, and I can say that is missing, you know. So there's something around the professional learning that we all need to learn from it. And I think until that, then that pipeline will forever be blocked. But more importantly, I think unless the Department for Education, unless they can acknowledge, that we have a pipeline block for this demographic of people, and B, that there is systemic racism in our schools and that we need to address it. I think until the government can say, do you know what, we need some help with this, it will forever be these types of conversations, roundtables, grassroots organisations that are just trying to make a difference. But it needs to come from the very top, is my view.
You know, Evelyn, that Elaine and I both work on the early career teaching programme with UCL, and I think we both say that there's an absence of discussion around anti-racist teaching and racial literacy within the frameworks that those programs are written on. That doesn't stop us, of course, from actually making some of it within the curriculum that we take from the framework. And we have an opportunity to do that as we write our new program for September 2025. We're lucky to have people around us that can help us really write great materials and really make a difference to teachers as we acquire this racial literacy and we strive to be anti-racist teachers. But you declared yourself an optimist, so I wonder where you see good examples of this. Schools that really take this seriously, wherever those schools might be in different parts of the country. Do you have shining examples of school leaders who are really making a difference in this regard?
So just coincidentally, I was at a round table yesterday with a group of very committed people in the sector. There was a guy there from the Cabot Learning Trust, which is kind of Bristol way, and he was kind of sharing some of the work that he was doing. And he's a CEO, and he was talking about making sure that people, middle and senior leaders, get opportunities to shadow him, and particularly from marginalized backgrounds, people from ethnic minorities, that they can see, and they kind of, do the walk with him and spend time and go to meetings, and I can see that, and they're embedding, they're looking at their curriculum in terms of decolonizing the curriculum. So all of that is really good. But the one that I would particularly encourage leaders to look at is Ealing Learning Partnership. And there's local authority, and there's this Ealing Learning Partnership within that, and they are doing some phenomenal work around race equity. They've got race equity leads that are attached to a number of their schools. They train their race equity leads, and it's an ongoing program. It's not a one-off, it's not bolted on, it's baked in. And then they go into their schools and they're working with their schools, looking at race equity and how to support school leaders and teachers in the classroom. And I think, for me, I think they're doing some fantastic work. And I know local authorities are kind of being pushed out and marginalised and so on, but the ones that are doing a good work, I think that other local authorities could kind of lean into and say, well, that's a really good piece of research. They do quite a bit of research as well. So I would say Ealing Learning Partnerships is one that I would encourage listeners to have a look at.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And that, what I hear from that as well is that leadership really matters.
Yeah.
The mindsets of leaderships and the way that people in power in schools are addressing this and feel the urgency of it is hugely important. We could talk about this for hours, and I could certainly talk to you about this for hours, but we perhaps recognise that we've taken enough of your time. But before you go, we have a tradition on our podcast that we give every guest a post-it note to write something on. So I'm going to pass you your post-it note. And my challenge to you is, what are you going to write on your post-it note? And where would you like to stick or post-it note. We've had people stick post-it notes on staff room toilet doors, planners, on the desk of the DFE. You can stick your post-it note wherever you like it. Keep it clean though. Keep it clean though, please.
Keep it clean.
Here is your post-it note.
Okay, thank you so much. So, do you know, like in schools and colleges, and you have like your home screen, and like the name of your school would come up, and so I'd like it on the home screen of everybody's laptop. So you log on, and your logo would come up, and before you type in your password, what I would like to say on my post-it note is, just be you, because everybody else is taken.
Ah, I love that. What a powerful way to start the day. Just be you. I love that.
I don't know when the last time was you heard a school bell ring, Evelyn, but that's our school bell ringing now, which means that I'm going to have to kick you out of the staff room, ask you to brush those almond croissant crumbs off your lap. And thank you for spending the hour with us, because it's been an education. It's been a privilege. It's been lovely, really, to sit and chat and giggle for the last 60 minutes. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Our thanks go to Evelyn Forde, MBE, for sharing oat milk chai latte and almond croissant with us this week in the staff room. You can find her book, Her Story, in all good bookstores.
Please do get in touch if you would like to be part of the conversation. Click on the link at the bottom of the Staff Room webpage.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, there's more where that came from. Search IOE Podcast from wherever you get your podcasts to find episodes of the Staff Room, as well as more podcasts from the IOE.
And a quick favour before you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd really appreciate it if you could give the IOE podcast a rating. 5 stars would be nice if you're enjoying the show. And that will help us to reach more people who are interested in hearing what the staff room is all about.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast.